In summer, a garden often looks full of life. Plants grow quickly, the soil seems active, and everything feels in balance. But as the season shifts toward fall, something quiet begins to change beneath the surface. The same garden that looked strong only weeks ago can start to feel different. Growth slows down, the soil feels drier, and plants that seemed perfectly healthy may suddenly stop responding the way they did before. Many gardeners notice this change but cannot explain it clearly. At first, it is easy to think the plants are becoming weak or that something is missing in care. The natural reaction is often to add more fertilizer, hoping it will bring back the same energy seen in summer. But this is where something surprising happens. In many cases, the plants are not the real problem. The soil itself is shifting into a quieter state, losing part of its active strength as temperatures drop. This is where an important contradiction appears. More fertilizer does not always improve fall soil conditions. In fact, in some situations, it can make the balance even less stable. Instead of restoring energy, it can disrupt the natural slowdown process that soil goes through during seasonal change. There is a simple fall soil approach that works differently from most common methods. It does not rely on stronger feeding or expensive products. Instead, it focuses on helping the soil quietly rebuild its natural structure during this seasonal transition. Over time, this approach has been observed to create healthier soil conditions that support stronger growth in the following season. You are not doing anything wrong. This change is something many gardeners only begin to understand after years of observing how soil behaves across different seasons. The garden is not failing. It is simply entering a different phase that requires a different kind of attention. To understand this better, it is important to look at what actually happens to soil after summer ends and why it begins to lose its active energy. After the heat of summer passes, the soil does not remain the same. High temperatures, frequent watering, and continuous plant growth slowly use up the available organic matter in the ground. Each cycle of watering and plant uptake removes small amounts of nutrients. Over time, these losses build up, even if the garden still appears healthy on the surface. By the time fall arrives, the soil begins to enter a quieter stage. It may still look normal from the outside, but inside, the level of biological activity starts to slow down. Microorganisms that once worked quickly begin to reduce their pace. Organic matter breaks down more slowly, and the overall system becomes less active. This is why some gardeners feel that their garden suddenly changes after the first cool nights. It is not a sudden problem, but a gradual shift that becomes noticeable once the pace of summer slows down. Often, this change is misunderstood. It can look like the plants are struggling, when in reality, the soil itself is entering a period of reduced activity. The foundation beneath the plants is adjusting to new conditions, and that adjustment affects everything growing above it. To understand why common solutions like fertilizer do not fully solve this, it is important to look deeper into how soil actually processes nutrients during cooler seasons. Fertilizer is often seen as the quickest way to fix weak-looking plants or tired soil. While it can help in certain conditions, it does not always address the deeper changes that happen in fall. Fertilizer mainly feeds plants directly, but it does not rebuild the long-term structure of the soil itself. As temperatures drop, the activity of soil microbes naturally slows down. These tiny organisms play a key role in breaking down organic matter and converting nutrients into forms that plants can use. When their activity decreases, the soil becomes less efficient at processing what is added to it. This means that even when fertilizer is applied, it may not be fully broken down or absorbed in the way it is during warmer months. Instead of creating lasting improvement, it can sit in the soil without fully integrating into the natural cycle. A common misunderstanding appears here. Many gardeners assume that weaker plant growth always means the soil needs more food. This leads to increasing fertilizer use, hoping for faster results. However, the issue is not always a lack of nutrients. It is often a slowdown in the soil's natural processing system. In reality, the soil itself is entering a slower phase. It is not empty or broken. It is simply functioning at a different pace. Recognizing this shift is important for choosing the right approach during fall instead of relying on methods that work better in active growing seasons. Experienced gardeners often notice early signs of this change before most people do. These subtle signals appear quietly in the garden as the season begins to shift. In early fall, the garden begins to send small but noticeable signals that something beneath the surface is changing. One of the first signs is that organic matter, such as fallen leaves, starts to break down more slowly than it did during summer. What once disappeared quickly into the soil now remains visible for longer periods. Another sign is how water behaves. Instead of soaking in quickly, moisture may stay on the surface for a longer time before slowly absorbing. This does not necessarily mean the soil is unhealthy, but it does indicate a change in how active the soil structure has become. Plant growth also begins to show differences. Even when watering remains consistent, some areas of the garden may grow unevenly. Certain plants continue slowly, while others seem to pause without a clear reason. This uneven response can feel confusing at first. Experienced gardeners often describe this moment in a simple way. The garden feels less responsive. It is not stopping completely, but it no longer reacts as quickly as it did during peak growing months. This is an important discovery because it shows that the soil is not failing. Instead, it is transitioning into a recovery phase. During this phase, the soil shifts its focus from rapid growth to internal balance and rest. Understanding this shift helps explain why many gardeners take the wrong approach next, often leading to unnecessary costs and effort. When fall arrives, many gardeners respond by increasing their use of fertilizers or switching to stronger products. The assumption is that if plants look less active, they must need more nutrients to recover. Some even begin feeding the soil more frequently than they did during summer. However, this approach often leads to unexpected results. Instead of improving long-term soil health, it can create a cycle of short-term changes that do not last. The garden may show brief improvement, but the underlying soil structure remains unchanged. Over time, this can result in wasted money, because more products are being used without addressing the actual condition of the soil. It can also create an imbalance, where the soil becomes dependent on external inputs rather than rebuilding its natural stability. Another effect is that improvements often do not last. The garden may look better for a short period, but once the added nutrients are used or washed away, the soil returns to its previous condition. The key idea that is often overlooked is simple. Fall is not the time to push the soil harder. It is the time to help it rebuild slowly and naturally. Instead of forcing growth, the focus should shift toward supporting structure and balance. This understanding opens the door to a different method that experienced gardeners quietly use, which works with the soil's natural seasonal rhythm instead of against it. Instead of relying on stronger fertilizers or frequent feeding, experienced gardeners often take a much simpler approach during fall. They shift their focus away from forcing growth and begin supporting the natural condition of the soil itself. One of the most common methods is covering the soil lightly with organic material. This can include dry leaves, small plant residues, or a thin layer of compost. This covering does not act as a strong fertilizer. Instead, it works as protection for the soil's surface and the life within it. This layer helps maintain a more stable environment beneath the surface. It reduces sudden changes in temperature and moisture, allowing the soil to adjust slowly to the seasonal transition. Beneath this cover, microbial activity continues at a steady pace, even as the weather becomes cooler. The key idea behind this method is not to force the soil to stay active, but to protect the activity that is already there. Soil life does not stop in fall, it simply slows down. By supporting this slower rhythm, the soil maintains its structure instead of collapsing into inactivity. This approach is also practical because it requires very little cost. Most of the materials used are naturally available in the garden itself. Despite its simplicity, it often leads to noticeable improvements in the following season, when the soil becomes more responsive and balanced. The effectiveness of this method is closely connected to timing. When and how it is applied can influence how well the soil responds in the long term. In gardening, timing often plays a more important role than the strength of any product used. This becomes especially clear during the fall season when soil conditions begin to change gradually rather than suddenly. When support is given early in the fall, the soil has more time to adjust and stabilize before winter arrives. This allows natural processes to continue in a balanced way beneath the surface. The transition becomes smoother, and the soil retains more of its structure during colder months. However, when similar actions are taken too late in the season, the results are often less noticeable. The soil has already slowed down significantly, and its ability to respond quickly is reduced. As a result, the same effort does not produce the same effect. This shows an important principle. Small actions taken at the right time are often more effective than stronger actions taken at the wrong time. The soil responds best when it is supported during its natural transition phase, not after it has already settled into dormancy. Understanding this timing helps explain why some gardeners consistently see better results year after year. It is not always about doing more work. It is about doing the right thing at the right stage of the season. Once this approach is applied correctly, changes in the soil begin to appear gradually over the following weeks, often in subtle but meaningful ways. After applying a gentle, supportive approach to the soil during early fall, changes do not appear suddenly. Instead, they develop slowly over time, often becoming noticeable within 2 to 3 weeks. These changes are subtle at first, but they indicate that the soil is beginning to stabilize again. One of the first signs is improved moisture balance. The soil starts holding water more evenly, without drying out too quickly or staying overly wet on the surface. This creates a more consistent environment for plant roots. Another sign is increased activity beneath the surface. Earthworms and other small organisms begin to move more actively again, especially in areas where the soil was previously dry or compacted. Their presence is a clear indicator that the soil environment is becoming healthier. Plant behavior also becomes more stable. Instead of uneven growth patterns, plants begin to show a more steady and predictable response. Even though growth is not rapid, it becomes more balanced and consistent. It is important to understand that these changes are not dramatic. They do not happen overnight, and they do not create instant visible transformation. Instead, they reflect a gradual improvement in the soil's internal structure. This process reminds us that healthy soil systems work slowly. They respond best to steady care rather than sudden intervention. Recognizing this helps build a more realistic expectation of how fall soil management should feel and function. At the end of this process, the most important understanding becomes clear, not just about soil, but about how gardens truly improve over time. A healthy garden is not created through force or constant intervention. It develops through balance, patience, and an understanding of natural cycles. Fall is one of the most important phases in this cycle, not because it demands more effort, but because it requires a different kind of attention. During this season, the goal is not to push plants into faster growth. Instead, it is to support the soil as it naturally slows down and prepares for recovery. When this shift is understood, gardening becomes less about control and more about observation. The most effective approach is often the simplest one. By allowing the soil to rest, protect itself, and gradually rebuild its internal structure, stronger results appear over time without unnecessary effort or expense. In the end, the lesson is straightforward. Do less. Get more. When the soil is allowed to follow its natural rhythm, it becomes stronger on its own, and the garden reflects that strength in every new season.